full disclosure, I had not planned on watching these movies. However, Rebel Moon dropped, Rebel Moon Part 2 specifically dropped, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to two bird, one stone it. Why didn't I intend to watch these movies? Well, because they're not the intended cuts of the movies. And boy howdy, let me tell you, it shows.
Movies, music, story times, all kinds of shit for you. Everything goes in its house and out from corpulent.
If you're just a person that hates Zack Snyder, no matter what, there's nothing for you here. Don't watch these movies. You're going to abhor them. If you, like we here at the channel, like Zack Snyder's work, I'll make an exception to Army of the Dead, which I wasn't gelling 100% with. But if you like Zack Snyder's work, and if you're going to be brutally honest with yourself, there's a lot lacking in these particular films. But there's also the understanding that there's an hour missing from each one of these. And like I said, you feel that, man. You just feel it throughout. It's not a smooth ride, you know what I'm saying? I've never seen something so obviously condensed and kind of like neutered, you know. This is definitely a cut that was made for a rating, for one. Especially now that we know that Snyder's intent was to go into kind of like heavy metal territory. And I don't mean the music genre. I mean, like the sci-fi cult magazine from Europe, heavy metal. So, you won't get that feeling at all here. Other things you don't get, the feeling of fleshed out characters, the feeling of world building that's done well, there's a lot that just feels empty, very thin. So, it's a shame because you could see the skeleton of the story very well. I mean, remains somewhat intact, but a skeleton is just that, A skeleton's not going to move around without muscles, It's just going to be there in a fucking corner yellowing. And that's kind of where this movie, or these couple of movies, I'm just going to refer to it as one movie, really, because it plays best that way if you watch them back to back. I can't imagine many people had a good experience waiting months to see the second one, or if they even had a desire to see the second one after waiting, because the first one is definitely the weakest. And, a lot of it has to do, again, with that very kind of rushed feeling. Nothing is allowed to breathe long enough to give it gravitas, to give it meaning, to give any moments with these characters that you pick up along the way. Whenever they try to give them a serious moment, or a moment that should have some heft to it, it just kind of doesn't feel like it deserves any particular investment from the viewer, because you're bereft of really any fucking context to these characters. And let me be clear, you don't have to have like tons of dialogue to give characters substance. You can show us, and Snyder's very good at showing us things. And with a good writer, he can also tell us things. But here, boy, man, it's just not gelling, And I want to hope that that's because they cut a fucking hour out of each movie. To kind of paraphrase Snyder, he cut an hour out of each. Then he he condensed it into one story and then broke that in half. And that's how these things came out. They were a contractual thing that he had to do. And, man, I hope Netflix learns their lesson to not continue to... If they continue to make these movies, which apparently they want to, don't do that. Just let him release his fucking cuts. He's always going to have haters. Just let him release the goddamn cuts, man. These PG-13 atrocities aren't it, man. They just aren't fucking it. Anyway, if you haven't seen these movies, I'm not going to spoil anything if you still want to see them as they are. Or I'm going to try to not spoil, really. But basically, they're just a conglomeration of, what they were going to originally be. They were going to be originally Star Wars movies. So it's interesting to watch them and with that mindset. Like, you can still see how if you replace this with that, and that with this and that person with that, you could see how this was a Star Wars movie very easily. But things, of course, have been recontextualized, obviously. Another thing that clearly influenced this was Seven Samurai, Kurosawa movie. And now that I've mentioned those two obviously major influences, these movies are not anywhere as good as Star Wars, as in the original trilogy, or Seven Samurai. Obviously, I never expected that. But Star Wars, I mean, you can make a damn good sci-fi film, and it's just not hitting on that level. These cuts definitely not. I don't know, man. It just I don't want to say I was disappointed, but there was things that definitely you can see how a longer cut will massively improve them. But there's some things that I question whether they will be improved or not. And one of those things is the casting. Some of the actors just kind of don't feel good as the characters are portraying. They don't feel real. They don't deliver their dialogue in a way that's convincing. I guess that's the best way to put it. Some of these actors don't feel convincing as their characters. It's kind of fucking weird, man. Like, I'll give you a good example. There's some rebels in this, as in some long-standing rebels that our characters are trying to basically bring into the mix to help them fight, the big bad of the movie, right? And they're like a brother and sister leaders of this rebel group, and there's just something like thoroughly unconvincing about them. They don't feel like fucking people that have led, battles. They don't feel real, man. They just don't feel fucking real. So, I mean, a lot can be done by, again, giving characters context, but if the acting or the delivery is kind of like the problem, or the actor they chose in general just doesn't kind of like bring it through, that might be an issue that can't be fixed. Another thing that's super obvious is that the blood, gore, violence has been stripped down dramatically. Now we know that he's going for a heavy, as aforementioned, heavy metal aesthetic. And if you've ever read those anthology magazines, comics, if you want to call them that, they're they're very risque, to say the least, in a lot of ways. They push boundaries. You're not going to get any of that. You know what I'm saying? So I can only imagine that an hour more of footage, that's going to also add to that. And it's going to liven up scenes, I hope. Say what you will about Snyder, but he can direct an action scene. I got to say that in part one, the action kind of feels kind of odd. It doesn't feel as exciting as you'd expect Snyder to direct. Part two kind of makes up for that in Final Stand, kind of third act. But yeah, there's something lacking there. It felt like some shots were reframed to avoid even showing gore or potential violence that might be too much. But I feel like, man, they really pulled the reins back on stuff, So I don't know if that's going to be fixable or not. Certainly feels like less of a problem than the actor thing, which again, like Sofia Boutella is your lead, and at times I feel like she's fine, and at other times I feel like there's something severely lacking, and that's the lead. You know what I'm saying? She's not a bad actress. I'm just saying it's weird, but I felt that throughout. Whereas with the action, I mean, if they truly did shoot something in the heavy metal vein, then feasibly it could be amped up to be a lot more exciting, thrilling, what have you. They gotta have more with these characters. They're basically building a band of badasses, a la Seven Samurai, and we get so little context of these characters, and because of that, we don't really give a shit about them. You kind of, again, you see the basic foundation of them there, but you're like, I need more, guy. You know what I'm saying? I need a little more here. Like Charlie Hunnam is a character here, kind of like a thief, a space pirate, if you will, and or bounty hunter, really. And man, he's weird. You know what I'm saying? He's another one that I was like, that's just weird, man. None of them can be great, you know? But he's hella fucking just weird. He just vibes weird, man. I don't know. I can't explain it. But anyway, the visual effects are kind of like on and off for me, you know? Sometimes they look great, and sometimes there's this really weird, stagey quality to them. And there's definitely some scenes where the backgrounds are just like, you're like, whoa, that's just not a good blend of, of a set and a green screen. It looks kind of fucking bad, you know, in some sequences. I know a lot of people bitch about Zack Snyder's use of slow-mo. There's not a lot of it in these cuts. Maybe in the longer cuts there will be. But I've never had a problem with it if it's used to accentuate something. Like in Watchmen, I think it's like perfectly used. 300 also. Comic book movies, you know, you're basically recreating frames, and sometimes you're reading comic books and you're like, that's fucking badass looking. You know what I'm saying? So it works with like comic book movies. But here, again, they don't use a lot of it. But when they do use it, it just kind of doesn't look cool. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't have that zest that he brings to it, whether you like it or not. You can at least go admire the composition of it. Here you're just kind of like, that was a thing. A lot of like the subplots and character relationships are so truncated that you're like, there's got to be more scenes of this, because all of a sudden it's just kind of thrust on you at times. Like there's a subplot with this character called Nemesis, which is one of the kind of people badasses they pick up along the way, and she's had a history with losing her child. She's on the planet where she's kind of like a protector for these people against, the native resident of this planet. They're like, I guess, final remaining native of this planet that also lost her children to the people that colonized there. So that's interesting. That's a lot of substance that you could play with, but it just comes and goes, and then it's reintroduced and just doesn't feel substantial enough. And she gets a lot more than some of these other characters do. There's a dude that's, I mean, he barely gets anything. I forgot his fucking name for that. Tarak, yeah, Tarak, I think, or Takar, one of those two. Anyway, he's just kind of like a background guy. But then he gets these scenes where you're like, there had to be more, because they're giving this guy lines that suggest there was more, but there isn't in here. Let's look at some positives. The music is fantastic. When it rips, it fucking rips. It's a great score. And I can't wait to hear it in its complete form, with scenes that it could, fully flesh out with that. Because the score really pumps you up at times, Strong visuals are strong. The strong action, when it does come along, is strong. So that's cool. Certain characters, despite not being fleshed out, are very interesting. For example, the robot Jimmy, which has a larger role to play in the second movie. He's kind of like this hanging Chad in the first one, which again makes sense given where the plot is going. But you also wonder, did he have more scenes in the first one? And you definitely wonder if he had more scenes in the second one, because if he didn't, then that would also feel kind of unsubstantial, despite him being there more, Jaimin Hanzo is in this. I love Jaimin, but his character was one of like the least fleshed out mofos in this, and he's basically like a very important to the plot, So I don't know, man. These movies in this state, I just can't recommend. They're just not complete, And I'm not saying that a complete version is gonna rock, but it won't be this, at least. These movies are very. They just feel like shadows, husks of something. I'm just gonna put this out there too. As it stands in this cut, some of the dialogue fucking sucks ass. I'm talking balls, bro. Like I was listening to some of this stuff and I was like, that sounds god awful. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes they speak just as if they were normal people nowadays. Just hanging out or whatever. Sometimes they speak in like a kind of like a melodramatic, pseudo Shakespearean like approach, and Sometimes they have that kind of like, old history movie type of vibe to the way the dialogue is written. It's really fucking weird, man. I don't know what's up, but some of the dialogue just, I was like, oh, that's bad, man. That's so bad. The villains, I gotta say, stink. You know what I'm saying? The main bad guy, I guess he's fine, I guess he would be like, had this been a Star Wars movie, he would have been like, the fucking, either top fucking, what do they call the fucking Empire military dudes? Whatever the fuck. Anyway, would have been one of them dudes, or maybe like a Darth Vader type Sith or some shit like that. There's a guy that would have clearly been like an emperor figure, and he's kind of just in the background because they have plans for more of these movies. But just visually, the main guy, the main behind the scenes badass that we just get a taste of, that guy, just visually, I want to punch him in the fucking grill, man. There's something like shitty about him, just visually. And our main bad guy, at times, again, that a lot of it has to do maybe with delivery and dialogue, going back to that acting and that writing. He just kind of sometimes feels hella whack, and then sometimes you're like, okay, fine, it's okay, but you're never like, this guy's a ripping badass villain. You're just never thinking that. And there's some silly ass shit that goes on that I don't know, man. In this cut, it's just I was like, I don't like that. There's also this thing with beards in this movie, like facial hair. I don't know if they're fake or they're just like badly combed, but like, for example, the main bad guy, his beard, he looks hella fucking fake. Jaimin's beard gotta be fake too, because it looks fake as shit. I don't know, man. Maybe that's just being too nitpicky, but so that's the problem. Once a movie starts to lose its hold on you, you begin to see more issues. You begin to be less forgiving of those issues, and that's where I found myself. Like, I can overlook, every movie has flaws. I can overlook plenty of flaws if your movie's still cool or fun, entertaining, or good, or even great, or especially great. I should say, I can overlook a lot, but this is kind of like fucking mid at best. That's if you're being really lenient. These cuts are fucking ass, if we're being honest. Rebel Moon Part 1, if I have to give it a score on a scale of 0 to 10, I'm going to go with like a 3, maybe. You know what I'm saying? Maybe a 3. And Part 2, man, there's some rough dialogue shit in the beginning, but it is a conclusion. I'll give it like maybe like a 4 to 5, maybe. I feel like I'm being too generous. And this cut, they're just not good movies. They're decent, like outlines of a fucking movie that you could see somebody going, okay, now we need to add the stuff that makes this matter, because as it stands, they don't fucking matter. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, those are my thoughts on the theatrical, quote unquote, or whatever the fuck, PG-13 cuts of Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2. Netflix. I don't even give a shit if the movie sucks. You're supposed to be like different than your average studio, God knows you greenlight a bunch of garbage too, so might as well just let people do what the fuck they want, man. Your quality levels are all over the fucking map. Just let them do whatever the fuck they want at the very least. The point is, these blew, avoid at all costs. Until you can compare, if you're interested in comparing things, then do that. Anyway, I'm out, guy.